Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today is the 1st of December. Today we're doing a front update focusing on Maryinka, Avdiivka, the Bakhmut area, and Kupiansk. So let's begin by looking at Maryinka, where over the past 2 weeks the Russians have conducted offensive activities, especially in the northernmost parts of the settlement, which amounted to an advance of around 400 meters as the Russians cleared out 2 additional blocks, which included a lot of Ukraine's forward defensive positions of the 79th Air Assault Brigade. The Ukrainian defensive positions are mainly located in basements of the remains of these houses, because the houses themselves, as you'll see in some of the drone footage, they're either completely leveled or there's just some rubble that remains over there, especially in the center of Maryinka. And so the Ukrainians were holding out in basements that had to be cleared out one by one, which is a very arduous process. And going further south, today there was a video released by the Russian side showing their flag being raised in the southwestern corner of Maryinka. And so that amounts to an advance of about 600 meters. And what you'll see is, first of all, the utter devastation in the center of Maryinka. You could see it over here. And then as we go deeper into the video, there is the footage of the Russian flag. And then at the end, the Russian drone shows the areas of Maryinka that are still contested. So that's around here. These are some of the houses that the Russians still need to clear out. And that segues into a very important point. I saw some people claiming that the entirety of Maryinka was captured. It's important to note that there's no indication of this. Those claims are premature. And there's 2 areas where the Ukrainians are still most likely resisting the Russian advances. So first one is just to the north of the house where the flag was raised. There's no indication that these blocks in this blue rectangle were cleared out. And this northwestern corner, again, is still very highly fortified, as the 79th Brigade has been resisting in this area for months and had opportunities to set up positions in the houses or in the basements. And then looking further north, there's this part of Maryinka, which is to the north of this fishing pond over here. So this is still considered a part of Maryinka technically. It spans, I believe, 1.3 kilometers, the area in this blue rectangle. And within this area, of course, the houses suffered very significant damage, but not to the same extent as the ones in the center of Maryinka. So you do still have a lot of Ukrainian defensive positions that are stationed around here, and it will be just as difficult to clear them out if the Ukrainians resist with the same ferocity as it was for the Russians to clear out the central parts of Maryinka. Now moving on to Avdiivka, heavy bombardment of the city continues with strikes reported from Russian Mi-28 and Ka-52 attack helicopters using LMUR helicopter-launched guided air-to-surface missiles. And they launched strikes in particular on the coke plant. So we actually have here this video, not this one, but the one located over here, which shows the LMUR missile firing at an underpass which is located beneath a railway. And that underpass, it was storing a Ukrainian vehicle that had entered from the western parts, the western road leading into the coke plant. And it's supposed to be the storage area for the Ukrainian supplies before they make their way into the entire Avdiivka coke plant facility and the tunnel system. And so these underpasses are extremely important. They serve as an entrance into the vast labyrinth of Ukrainian fortifications that we know are around the coke plant and could potentially also include parts of the residential areas under Avdiivka. And so here you could see some of the footage of that. I'll quickly show you guys, first of all, a view of the coke plant. Here's a drone footage showing that from the Russian perspective. And then here you could see the vehicle making its way into that underpass. And then you have the 2 missiles fired from the Russian helicopter that occurs later on around here. And yeah, that you could see that moment located over there. On Avdiivka's southern outskirts, the Russians consolidated their positions around the Promka industrial district and the rural dachas located to the south of Promka, so around this red rectangle here. The Ukrainians are still resisting Russian advances in this small area over here, this isolated piece of houses, this housing complex, which is also a part of the rural dacha area. And there are a lot of trenches that are located over here. So it is now the new Ukrainian vanguard, and Ukrainian defenders are holding onto this area to allow for the vast majority of the Ukrainian garrison to basically withdraw either to the larger Tsarska Ohota fortification system further west or into the residential areas of Avdiivka further north. And so this vanguard force is still holding on to this housing complex. And there was a video that backed this up and this is from Bars 11. This is a unit that was previously defending against the Ukrainian counteroffensive on the Orikhiv sector, but it appears that they were moved to this area around Avdiivka over the past couple of weeks or a couple of months. And you could see in the video, there's an FPV that hits the Ukrainian positions in these houses. Now, moving on to the northern outskirts of Avdiivka, we have a geolocated video of Russia's Sudoplatov unit, drone unit, with their FPVs hitting Ukrainian defenses around the water treatment facility. This video proves that the Ukrainians do still have forward positions located in trenches and tree lines that are marked in this blue rectangle. And so previously it was imagined that the Russians were able to get positions within this treatment facility. The Ukrainians were able to counterattack, and they still hold on to their positions that are located directly to the east of the coke plant in this region. I would change the map to mark this. There is a technical issue with this polygon, like I can't change the marking to show that the Ukrainians advanced in this region. But just so you know, the current front line looks like this. The Ukrainians really are defending tooth and nail in the northern outskirts of Avdiivka. If you zoom out, you'll see that there are a lot of Ukrainian defensive positions located in these dachas in the northern outskirts of the city. And that extends even further north into the fields and next to that treatment facility. And these have been built up over a vast period of time. So this is an area that the Ukrainians have multiple fallback lines in. And they really are trying to hold the first line of defense. But even if that one falls, there are multiple ones behind that. And so there are very intense battles going on around these dacha areas. And the Russian attacks in this region are not as significant as in other areas due to the fierce Ukrainian fortification systems and defenses in this region. But you do still see a lot of Russian FPV strikes that try to degrade the Ukrainian infantry positions in their forward trenches. Around Stepove, there is also a minor change to the front line. On November 28th, it was reported by Russian sources that they were forced to withdraw from the eastern outskirts of the village and were forced to basically set up their new forward positions along the rail line over here. But something that contradicted this claim came out on the 29th of November. It's a video from the Maryinka drone group, and their FPVs hit Russian infantry as they made their way to the rail line. So they started out in the fields to the east of the rail line, making their way like this. And this is an extremely dangerous route, as you have a lot of Ukrainian drones and artillery waiting for Russian infantry to go through these open areas to reach the rail line. And that's when you see a lot of these strikes. And even once they reach the rail line, there's even more significant strikes with these FPVs. And a lot of that can be seen in the videos linked on my map. And so they were able to make it. Some of them were casualties, some of these infantrymen. And then eventually you have this geolocated video from a house in the eastern outskirts of Stepove, which was hit by the Ukrainian side, indicating that there was a Russian presence in that region. This geolocation is also backed up by the mapping of deep state maps. They have the Russians actually controlling more of the eastern outskirts of Stepove than I have on my map, generally in this area over here. So it does appear that the Russians do still have a presence. Maybe it's not permanent, but they still are able to cross over the rail line and set up these positions in the eastern outskirts, although it has not developed into any additional advances so far, with the Ukrainians still holding onto their positions and conducting raids against the Russian positions with their vehicles from the 47th Mechanized Brigade from the western parts of Stepove. Moving on to the Bakhmut front, there are two new developments from this region. Starting off with Kremove, there was a claim made by the Russian side on the 28th of November that they were able to enter Kremove from the north, so using this attack vector. And Kremove itself as a village, it's really the focal point of it is this one road that I'll mark in this red arrow. So the Russians, their attack vector was in that direction. The Russian MOD, they claim on the 29th of November that they fully secured the village. And the interesting thing is, we don't have any geolocated footage from this village. We have some videos showing the aftermath of battles in this region, but those could not be directly geolocated to the village itself so far. But according to the Ukrainian deep state maps and several other Ukrainian sources, the Russians do have a significant presence in Kremove. The disagreement I've seen based on the several different mappings of this region is whether the Russians have full control or whether it's partial control. So for instance, on the deep state map, the Russian front line looks more like this, or more like this actually, where they control a basically half or a bit more than that of the settlement, but do not have full control over it. So there is a bit of ambiguity in that regard. What's likely is that there was a small Ukrainian garrison defending it over the past several months, really since the Battle of Bakhmut, but they could not send a significant garrison to hold the line around Kremove because, first of all, it's located on a valley. It's relatively isolated from other Ukrainian nodes of like command, supply, all of that. So it is pretty close to the Russian command nodes around Bakhmut. So they're at a disadvantage in that regard. And it is just a very small area in relative terms. So as the Wagner group earlier this year was taking the city of Bakhmut, the Ukrainian defenders were already preparing defenses in Kremove, and not just there, but also on the flanks. So the more significant Ukrainian defense node in this region is just to the north of it, located within this larger blue rectangle. And that's a big part of why Kremove never fell to the Russians, because the Ukrainians were offering very stiff resistance from the northern flank. But it has been months since then, and during that time, there probably has been a lot of attrition for the Ukrainian forces garrisoned in Kremove. So in terms of a rationale for withdrawal, the Ukrainians could still hold positions that are relatively close to Bakhmut to put pressure on the Russian garrison there, but not within Kremove itself, and that would be within this trench system. And the Ukrainians are still holding on to this area, and that will be a very difficult task for the Russians in terms of trying to clear it out. There's a lot of defenses built around the 0506 road, the one marked over here in blue, for instance. And those were built up over the course of several months during the Battle of Bakhmut. There were Russian attempts at taking those trenches, but they were always pushed back. So we'll have to see what occurs around here. And it does actually connect to what I'm going to talk about in the area around Bogdanivka. So here we have a video that was released sometime in November. So it could be older, but it is still important because of the geolocation of the video. What you'll see is that you had paratroopers from the 98th Air Assault Division, so the Russian forces. They were supported by T-80 tanks and BMD-2s. So they advanced along several paths from their original positions around Berkivka and made it to the area around here. This was previously the line of contact. And those Russian BMD-2s, they fired upon the Ukrainian forward positions, likely around this rail line marked in blue and around the Ukrainian defenses to the north of Kremove around here. And so they were trying to conduct suppressive fire onto the Ukrainian side. And at the same time, you had Russian infantry dismounting from these vehicles. I believe in this specific assault, you had 5 vehicles involved, and they dismounted and advanced closer to the Ukrainian direction, where you could see in the video footage, actually, there were some of these trenches set up by the Ukrainian side that the Russians began to clear out. And this assault was supported by a large component of Russian artillery. And so this shows there was a Russian mechanized assault in that direction that was able to advance. We'll try to measure it, actually. The extent of the Russian advance in this region really amounts to about 1 kilometer. And now the Russians are closer to the main defense node north of Kremove. But nonetheless, the Ukrainians still hold on to it. There's also reports of Russian advance around Bogdanivka. There's no concrete evidence of that yet. And I would say that if you want to get a deeper analysis of the entire Bakhmut area, the area to the west of Bakhmut, and in particular Bogdanivka, I do have this really long thread I wrote after, or actually during the Battle of Bakhmut, which goes through all of these different settlements and gives an analysis of the Ukrainian defense in the region and the topography. So I'll leave a link to that in the description if you're interested. But either way, there are renewed reports of fighting north of Bogdanivka. Now, moving on to the wider Oskila riverfront, over the past weeks, the Ukrainians have started using the German Leopard 185 tanks on the entire sector. And this is the one part of the front line where I believe they've actually seen active duty. And so they belong to the 44th Mechanized Brigade. Currently, they have 30 of these tanks at their disposal, and these are being used mainly for hit-and-run attacks on Russian forward positions. And so there was an incident which occurred, I believe, on November 29th. So you had the Ukrainian, or the Leopard 185 tank, probably starting around Prozotravinove or Vishneve, and it made its way along open fields. In some cases, it was also running parallel to a specific tree line, and it was making its way to the no man's land in an effort to fire upon the Russian forward positions that are located near this specific pond. So that could be perhaps to Raihorodka or to the area to the north of it. And if you remember, during the summer, the Russians actually did put in some resources into crossing over the river in this region, crossing past Raihorodka and establishing a bridgehead across the Zherbets taking over areas like Serhivka. So there is a Russian component in this region that could be attacked. So here we have footage of the actual incident recorded by a Russian drone. As you can see, the tank is advancing towards the line of contact. And in terms of what actually caused the vehicle loss, it could have been a mine, perhaps, although it is very hard to tell based on the video footage, or it could have been damage that was incurred due to the significant amount of artillery and mortar shelling that was directed at the tank by the Russian side once it was spotted. But in either case, it was immobilized, and you could see that the end product is that the Ukrainian crew abandoned the vehicle. And what you could see over here is that the hatches are open, which indicates they were able to escape, but now it is located in the no man's land. What's really interesting about this entire incident is that the Ukrainians decided to deploy this tank at the front line, and really a tank with such thin armor without the necessary amount of cover from, for instance, 105 millimeter howitzers. And in terms of some other key things to note in this video, it was not advancing along a tree line for the entirety of the video. And so that makes it more susceptible to being spotted, at least when it's going along a tree line. There is a better likelihood of it being camouflaged and not being immediately spotted during the combat operation. And also it's doing it during broad daylight. So in terms of like movements for these tanks, it is extremely dangerous to do that during daytime, even at nighttime, but daytime way more. Now, in terms of the amount that Ukraine has left, as we talked about before, they had 30 at their disposal. Now they have 29. And in terms of the pledges, there are pledges from Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands to deliver another 185 of these. So we'll have to see if that actually happens, and if it does, how long that will actually take to arrive in Ukraine and make it to the front line and actually have a meaningful impact on the situation around the Kupiansk front. Moving on to the village of Sinkivka, between the 27th to the 28th of November, a video released by the 95th Air Assault Brigade shows the Ukrainian tanks located in the northern outskirts of Sinkivka firing towards Russian positions located in the forested areas to the north of the village. This indicates there was a Russian advance that amounts to about 900 meters through the forested area to the north of Sinkivka. But it also indicates that the Ukrainians do have control over most of the village of Sinkivka. And you can see some of the tank fire directed at the Russian side in this footage over here, which I also have linked on my map. Now, in terms of why the Ukrainians have been able to hold onto this region for so long, that reason is really twofold. It has to do a lot with the forests due to the Ukrainian DRGs disrupting the Russian front line and making it difficult for them to hold onto positions over there permanently. But it also has to do with the Ukrainian defense around the eastern flank of Sinkivka. So during the summer, around August, there was a Russian attack aimed at taking control of Sinkivka's eastern flank in order to cut off supplies that run along this road in particular, and also in order to put pressure on the eastern flank to try to eventually take it over. And so these Russian gains at first were successful, but now we have evidence based on geolocated videos that were released recently by the Ukrainian side, which show that the Ukrainians have been able to retake the open fields and the tree lines that were captured by the Russians during those attacks in the summer. So here we have a video of Ukraine's Swedish STRV 122 main battle tank, which is a Swedish version of the Leopard 2, and it's located at this geolocated marker, and it's firing at Russian positions located in Vilshana. And the fighting force of the Russians in this region includes the 138th Motor Rifle Brigade, elements of the 1st Tank Regiment, and also the 25th Motor Rifle Brigade. So those are the Russian forces located around Vilshana that are conducting attacks towards Sinkivka, but also in areas that are located further east. So for instance, here we have a video which was recorded by the 14th Mechanized Brigade around the 30th of November, and it shows that they were able to repel a Russian attack. The Russian attack consisted of 2 tanks, and they were advancing along open fields in the direction of Ukraine's forward positions. Ukraine's forward positions are around this ditch over here, but they also have several fallback lines. This one, this one, this one, and this is all a part of trying to protect the eastern flank of Kupiansk to prevent a Russian breakthrough that would flank the city. And in this particular incident, you had the 14th Brigade spot the 2 tanks, and they shelled them, and both tanks were hit directly by Excalibur rounds. And in the video, a Russian infantry squad located in a trench was also shelled. So this tells us where the front line is, and it tells us that the Russians are continuing their armored assaults in this direction, with the Ukrainians holding them back for the most part during this period. And so that's all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.